So we're going to get started now. So first of all, my name is Anna Guida, and I am the project coordinator for Empower Idaho. Thank you so much for attending this webinar today, and a special thanks to Dr. Davis for presenting for us. Dr. Kyle Davis is a licensed clinical psychologist specializing in clinical health psychology. He earned his Bachelor of Science degree in psychology at Oklahoma State University and his PhD in clinical psychology at University of Colorado, Boulder. Dr. Davis completed his specialized training during his pre-doctoral internship in mood and sleep disorders. And in April 2018, he joined St. Luke's Idaho Pulmonary Associates, where he specialized in behavioral sleep medicine. So today's presentation is of particular expertise for Dr. Davis. Just a few things. All of the participants are muted except for myself and Dr. Davis. If you have questions, please leave them in the chat box in the control panel, and Dr. Davis will visit those during the Q&A section after his presentation. So yeah, thank you, and thank you, Dr. Davis, and I'm going to turn it over to you now.
All right, thanks, Anna. So to get started, can you all type in the chat box just to let us know that you can hear us? So I know Darla can. What about everyone else? Okay, we've got Catherine, Tamara, Kimberly, are you out there? Well, we're not totally sure about Kimberly right now. Hopefully she's out there too. But at least it seems like everything's working. So yeah, welcome to the class. And I've got quite a bit of stuff to cover today. I wanted to go over, to talk a little bit about sleep in general and the purpose of sleep. Talk a little bit about how much sleep people actually need and how that changes across the lifespan. Talk briefly about the relationship between sleep and mental health. And then we're going to try to spend most of the time talking about insomnia and how we go about treating that. So I'm curious, do any of you have experience with insomnia? Okay, good. Well, I hope the presentation will be helpful for you then. So at least a few people. Okay, so a little bit about the sleep in general. How would you all define sleep? What do you think sleep is? And once again, we'll use the chat box for your responses. So sleep is resting the body and mind, gives your brain a chance to rest. Anything else? I think it's actually a little bit, trickier than you may think. I mean, it's something that hopefully most of us are doing every day, and it's actually kind of hard to define. So yeah, most people are talking about the purpose of sleep, but what is that actually? So I think a more formal definition of sleep would be a naturally recurring state of mind and body characterized by altered consciousness, inhibited sensory activity, inhibition of voluntary muscles, and reduced interactions with your surroundings. Hopefully you're not interacting with your surroundings too much when you're asleep. And then the next question is, what do you think the purpose of sleep is? And so already have some good responses relevant to that. So we've got, I think, rejuvenation, giving your brain a chance to reboot itself, giving your brain a chance to rest. Anything else y'all can think of? All right, for those of you just joining us, we're really relying on the chat box for our conversation here. So feel free to jump in as I ask these questions. Okay, Kim's saying a time when your body focuses on doing repair work. Great answer, Kim. Okay, so there's actually a whole lot of stuff going on when we're sleeping. So it's not just you know, shutting your brain and body down. There's actually a ton of work going on, and I think that really speaks to the importance of sleep. So some of the things going on is by sleeping, you're helping restore your immune system, your nervous system, your skeletal system, your muscular systems, and in terms of your mind, it's really helping with your maintaining your mood, consolidating memories, and improving cognitive functioning. And so on the flip side of this, if you look at my little slide here, or the picture here, all the effects of sleep deprivation, you can assume that those are things that sleep is helping us do. So sleep is super important. But I want to spend most of this presentation talking to you all about how you can get the best sleep possible. We could easily have a whole presentation about that. So a little bit about the nature of sleep. So there are actually several different stages that we progress through as we sleep. So some helpful things to know. Each stage of sleep or each sleep cycle is approximately 90 minutes long. And you're cycling through all these these 5 stages all throughout the night. At the beginning of the night, we tend to get more what we call deep sleep. And then as the night progresses, we get less of that deep sleep and we get more REM sleep, which I'm sure you've heard of before. And we also know that each of these different states of sleep serve unique functions. And so it's important for all of them, or to get through all of these. So I don't want to really talk about this because once again, I've got too much stuff to cover. But when you can view the slides later and go back through and look at some of the details about these stages of sleep. Okay, so how much sleep do you all think most adults need? All right, Catherine, it looks like everybody's getting the general recommendations here. So really right at 8 hours. And then the way I think about this is more like a bell curve. So if you think about your need for sleep, you've got 8 hours right in the middle of your bell curve or your general distribution or normal distribution. And on the big parts of your bell curve, you've got 7 to 9 hours. And then you started to getting into the tails of the distribution. You got some people that only need around 6 hours of sleep to do just fine. So 6 to 6 or 6 to 6 to 7. And then on the other side of that, you got folks that maybe need closer to 9 to 10 or 10 hours of sleep. So a lot of variation there. And yeah, but in general, most people need around 8 hours. And then the next question for you is, how do you think sleep changes over the human lifespan in terms of how much sleep you need? So how much sleep do you think babies need? Yeah, around 16 hours. Yeah, I think you're right. And how does that change through our lifespan? So we said adults need around 8 hours. What about older adults? What about over the age of like 65? Oh, Catherine's saying it thinks it goes back up. Darla's saying it's a little bit less. Tamara's saying it's about the same. And yeah, so we actually need just about the same amount of sleep in our older or later years as we did in through most of our adult life. It just becomes a little bit more difficult to get it all at once, and so people start to wake up more frequently during the night, and then a lot of older folks are more likely to nap during the daytime. But anyways, I think you all did a really good job of answering that question. So, you know, at the beginning of life, we need the most amount of sleep, and then that steadily decreases throughout our adult life, and then kind of steadying out around the time that we reach 18, 20 years old. Okay, so now that we know what sleep does, how much sleep we need, let's talk a little bit about the relationship between sleep and mental health. So how do you all think sleep affects mental health? And conversely, how do you think mental health affects sleep? Okay, so Kim's saying that if you're experiencing anxiety, then that can interfere with sleep and cause insomnia. Totally right. Yeah, so less sleep has a negative impact on mental health. Anna's getting that one. Yeah, getting enough sleep makes it easier to make good choices, for sure. I think Karen's kind of getting at this. So you get less sleep, and then you're more likely to be anxious. All good responses there. So it's very common for people with mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, bipolar disorder, ADHD, to have problems with sleep. And particularly insomnia, though there are other sleep disorders like obstructive sleep apnea that have more physiological origins that also co-occur with mental health conditions pretty frequently too. And interestingly, insomnia is so sleep problems or insomnia in particular can be a risk factor for developing mental health conditions. So if you've been having problems with sleep, it's more likely that you'll go on to develop a major depressive episode or problems with anxiety. Or if you're already experiencing depression or anxiety, it's more likely that you'll experience problems with sleep. So these are very closely related conditions. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Sometimes it's kind of like which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's hard to say, you know. Sometimes the sleep problems come first and lead to other mental health problems, and sometimes the mental health problems come first and lead to problems with sleep. The good news is that by treating insomnia directly, you can see improvements in those other mental health conditions. So we used to view insomnia as just a symptom of other mental health conditions like generalized anxiety disorder, depression, or bipolar disorder. However, now we know that insomnia is kind of its condition all in and of to itself. And we can treat the insomnia separately and then see some real improvement in people's symptoms of depression and anxiety. So I found that to be a very rewarding aspect of treating insomnia, because I can help people with all sorts of other things going on too. Oh, and not to mention, oh yeah, like Catherine said, you know, whenever you're getting enough sleep, it's easier to make healthier choices. And so if you're feeling rested, it's a lot easier to get out and exercise, and it's also easier to make healthy food decisions. There's definitely a strong relationship between sleep and weight management too. Okay, so now we're going to really get into the weeds on insomnia here. So yeah, this is what I do several days of the week. So please ask me any questions. If they come up, I can get carried away pretty easily. So the DSM-5 definition of insomnia is dissatisfaction with sleep quality or quantity characterized by difficulty initiating sleep, so falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early. And then that dissatisfaction is causing significant distress or impairment in daytime functioning, and it's occurring at least 3 nights per week for at least 3 months, despite having enough opportunity to sleep. You know, so if you were working 18-hour days or something and you're exhausted because of that, but you can still sleep, well, we wouldn't call that insomnia. We call that working too much. So this is when you've got time to sleep, but you're just not able to sleep as much as you need to. So pretty easy for people to meet criteria for insomnia because it's really characterized just by this dissatisfaction overall occurring about half the days of the week for about 3 months. So prevalence of insomnia, if you look at the general population, let's say up to 35% of people will have a bout of acute insomnia, so short-term insomnia, and then 10 to 15% of folks have chronic or persistent insomnia. Then if you look at patients with diagnosed with mental health conditions, number goes way up. So I think well over 50% of people with mental health conditions also experience problems with sleep. And like we said before, you know, sleep problems are a symptom of many mental health conditions, and they're also a predisposing factor for developing the mental health or behavioral health conditions themselves. So if you have problems with insomnia, you are not alone. I don't know if that's consoling or not, but yeah, you're not alone. So actually, don't look at that slide. Don't read into it. What kinds of problems do you think are associated with insomnia? So we talked about the increased risk for mental health conditions. What about physical health conditions? I guess I already mentioned weight. Anything else you all can think of? And if you're a really quick reader, you may have already saw it on my slide. Okay, heart and lungs. It's definitely going to put increased stress on your cardiovascular system. So increased blood pressure. Darla is right about that. What else? Oh, inflammation. Good job, Kim. Yeah, chronic fatigue. Yeah, and so, you know, chronic fatigue, well, you would say it's probably different than chronic fatigue syndrome, but definitely would be related to fatigue itself. What other similar kinds of conditions do you think lack of sleep would exacerbate? Yes, pain. Yeah, so for people with chronic pain, lack of sleep is going to make pain worse. And then if pain is worse, it makes it more difficult to sleep. So really a vicious cycle there. Same thing would go for like conditions like fibromyalgia. Yeah, so just a few other things. So increased risk of type 2 diabetes now go along with weight, and it actually lack of sleep causes changes in hormones that regulate appetite and how full you feel. And so I think there's definitely a relationship there with type 2 diabetes, not to mention the inflammation that Kimberly was talking about. So people with insomnia are also at increased risk for alcohol and substance use. Why do you think that is? Why would people with sleep problems be more likely to abuse substances? Yeah, so coping with discomfort, and then you know, things like alcohol. Yeah, use it as a sedative. You know, it can help you fall asleep, but it can really disrupt the quality of your sleep, and so it doesn't really help you feel more rested, but it can help you fall asleep. Yeah. So other things, people with sleep problems demonstrate increased use of the healthcare system. They're at higher risk of accidents, and yeah, we already said chronic pain. Okay, so now I'm going to get into what we call the 4-factor model of insomnia. And this is how we understand insomnia develops and then is maintained over time. Let me get my little spotlight here. So first thing we want to talk about are predisposing factors for insomnia. And the way this little graph works is this threshold here. This line represents when people are having problems with insomnia. So first, this red bar represents what we call predisposing factors. And predisposing factors are anything in your family history, genetic background, life experiences that would make you more or less likely to develop insomnia later on. So commonly, these are family history of mental health conditions like depression, anxiety, substance use disorders, insomnia itself, early childhood traumatic experiences, health problems, what else do I want to say? Oh yeah, and then just and then having a diagnosis of a behavioral health condition. We already talked about that and why those are so closely related. Oh, I gotta turn off my. One second, I lost my ability to change the slides whenever I.
Do you need a hand? I'm not sure what I would do, but.
Oh, I think I can change it.
Got it. Let me know.
Non-drawing mode. Okay, there we go. Trying to be fancy with my my laser pointer there. Okay, so predisposing factors. I think we got all these. Oh, I didn't say that being a female makes people more likely to develop problems with sleep. Why do y'all think that is? Yeah, Karen got one of them, menopause. Yeah, parenting. Yeah, so I think you all are right. So there are just some things that happen in the lifespan that affect women differently than men. So then the one thing I did mention, aging also makes it more likely you'll have problems with sleep later on. Okay, so main thing though about predisposing factors, they just increase your risk for developing it. They don't give you insomnia. So the next thing we're going to talk about, precipitating factors, are the things that actually occur when people first start experiencing problems with sleep. So commonly, these are stressful life circumstances. So whether they're financial, they have to do with relationships, work-related stressors, health conditions, mental health conditions. These are all types of precipitating factors. So this is when people's, oh, and then also a big one, changes in people's sleep schedule. So let's say you have to work swing shifts or night shifts, things like that can be really rough on people's sleep, and that's when they can first start having problems with insomnia. So yeah, very common for people to experience this acute insomnia, or for their sleep to be disrupted during the stressful circumstance. However, most people's sleep will go back to normal once the stressor subsides. However, for people with chronic insomnia, it starts to take on a life of its own, and we'll talk about that in just a second. So anyways, review of the precipitating factors. Like we said, increased stress, changes in work schedules, traumatic events, physical and mental health problems, and oh yeah, and then a little shout out to all the night shift workers. Okay, so moving on to perpetuating factors. So I've got a question for you all. What do you think people do to try to make up for lack of sleep if they're not sleeping well? Okay, yeah, so one of the things they'll do, turn to stimulants, whether that's coffee, energy drinks, amphetamines. People will find, or some people will find something to help stay awake and function during the day. Oh, sorry, my lights are turning off. Okay, so we've got increased caffeine, sugar consumption. naps, over-the-counter sleep aids. Okay, so let's talk about one of these. Keep writing in as you come up with different ideas, and I'll start talking about these. So first category that we'll talk about are using substances to either help you fall asleep or stay awake during the day. So that's one of the three main types of perpetuating factors. So yeah, so you all got a lot of them here. And then other types of perpetuating factors would be prescription medications for sleep too. So your Ambien, Lunesta, Belsomra, Trazodone, all Seroquel. Sometimes people use it for that. All those things actually can end up making insomnia worse over time. And maybe you've experienced that if you've taken those medications and then you didn't have them, your sleep was probably worse, probably even worse than it was when your sleep problems first started. And then, of course, we've got the substances to stay awake, and I think we covered that. Now, so anyone else have something to say about, or what would you do if you weren't sleeping well, or what have you done in the past? So Tamara says naps, and that is super common. What else would you do in terms of like literal or like sleep itself? Okay, Darla says exercise. That is not a perpetuating factor, but that's a great thing to do if you're having problems with sleep. But that would not make your insomnia worse. Jody got it. Yeah, that's what I was looking for. So literally making up for lack of sleep. So whether that's napping, sleeping in when you get the chance, or going to bed early, anything where you're literally trying to make up for that lack of sleep can be considered a perpetuating factor for insomnia. And then what else do you think people do if they're not able to sleep besides the helpful things? So you all saying therapy, yeah, that's great. Exercise, great. What else do you think people do that maybe is not quite as helpful? Yes, Anna under the guise of Emily, got it. So doing things in bed other than sleeping. So some people will watch television in bed. They'll read in bed. They'll just lay in bed and try to relax. They'll lay in bed thinking about things. They'll lay in bed thinking about what happened 30 years ago and then what's coming up next week. And they're making to-do lists. Kimberly's right. They're using electronics. So they're grabbing their phone, they're grabbing their tablets and their laptops. They say, well, I can't sleep, so I might as well play a game of Words with Friends. And so I'm going to lay here in bed, or I'm going to scroll through Instagram, I'm going to scroll through Facebook, and wait until I get sleepy. And Kim's right. The light from electronic devices can interfere with your circadian rhythm, but they're also doing something else. And you're teaching your brain to do those things whenever you're in bed. And so that is at the heart of a lot of people's problems with insomnia, and we'll definitely get into that more in the second half of this presentation today. So one other type of perpetuating factor we haven't talked too much about yet are people's beliefs about sleep and how they can interfere with sleep. So what kinds of thoughts do you think are going through people's heads at 2 in the morning when they haven't been able to fall asleep yet? Yeah, why can't I sleep? I'm broken. I will never be able to sleep. Yeah. And you're right. So how helpful do you think it is to have the thought, I will never be able to fall asleep? Or how helpful is it to start worrying about everything? Or to be thinking about how, oh my gosh, I have to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. It's already 2 o'clock. That only gives me 4 hours to try to fall asleep. I have a presentation in the morning. I'm going to bomb it. My boss is going to hate me and I'm going to get fired. And so you can get into this vicious cycle pretty quickly whenever you start feeling pretty desperate for sleep. And as anyone who's had that experience before, you probably know that it wasn't all that helpful in helping you get back to sleep that night. And if anything, it has the potential to make your sleep problems worse over time. So those are all of the perpetuating factors. I think we got all of them here. One other thing, little caveat, this unrealistic sleep requirement expectations. Sometimes people run into problems with insomnia whenever they say, hey, I need to sleep 8 hours tonight, or, I felt really good whenever I slept 9 hours the other day. I think I need to sleep 9 hours every night because I felt really good when I did it that one time. So then they start trying to sleep 9 hours, but their body's not able to produce that much sleep. So they end up spending a lot of time in bed awake, and that's really what is causing their problems. So that's where the unrealistic sleep requirements come into play. And then, yeah, I think we got everything else there. So once people have engaged in these perpetuating factors for long enough, they tend to, I'm going to go back to my pointer here. So once they've been engaging in these perpetuating factors for long enough, they tend to develop what we call conditioned arousal. I like to explain conditioned arousal as a learned association between being awake and being in bed. And the best example I can give you of this that you may be able to relate to would be somebody that is watching television in the evening in their living room, and they're laying on the couch and they start to feel really sleepy, and they say, now's my chance to go to sleep. I'm finally feeling sleepy, and so I'm going to go to bed as soon as possible. So they get into bed as quickly as they can, and then they feel wide awake again. How can that happen? Why do you all think? Like, why could somebody be wide awake as soon as they get in bed when they were just feeling so sleepy out in the living room on the couch? Like, what changed? Okay, putting pressure on themselves to sleep. Yeah, that's definitely a component of it. But what we're talking about is even a little bit more basic than that. Could have something to do, with being a little stimulated. You get up, get ready for bed, turn off the lights. But that's really not at the heart of it. Not so much about the worrying. But that often does come along with it. That's a subtle distinction. So really what we think it is that people with chronic insomnia have spent so much time in bed awake in the past, thinking about other things, doing other things, that their brain will try to do those things again whenever they go to bed, regardless of how sleepy they're feeling. So let's say you spent the last 5 years, worrying about your finances and making plans for the next day, and dreaming about how you're going to solve your problems. And so that's a really strong association. You've done that 1,500 times or more if you've done that every day for the past 5 years. And so even if you feel really sleepy, your brain, whenever you get into bed again, your brain says, oh, I'm supposed to think about all my problems again because that's what I do whenever I go to bed. And so that's really how we think about conditioned arousal. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Okay, so definitely very, very common for the patients I work with in my insomnia clinic. So how do we get rid of this conditioned arousal? Well, most of the time people will use, so like if you're ever taking a hypnotic medication like Ambien, Lunesta, or used alcohol to try to help you sleep, that's trying to get at this conditioned arousal. If you've ever laid in bed and tried to use relaxation strategies, that's trying to target this conditioned arousal. And well, those things can work in the short term. They don't really solve the problem. They just decrease the conditioned arousal a little bit, and then maybe you're able to get to sleep, but really not a long-term solution. And so what I teach people to do is get rid of their perpetuating factors. if we can get rid of all the perpetuating factors, then we can get rid of this conditioned arousal over time. So in the graph here, you see we get rid of perpetuating factors, this conditioned arousal decreases over time. So that's really what we're after. And here's I spent a lot of time getting these little pictures in here. Yeah, so conditioned arousal is that learned expectation to be awake in bed, and it's really hard to get rid of, and some of you may be able to relate to that. Okay, so what do we do? So I said get rid of those perpetuating factors. Well, how do you go about doing that? So we use, or in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, really think of the treatment approach as having I explain it as three main treatment components, but it's really, at least the way I practice, is sleep restriction, stimulus control, and then other individualized factors that are going to be relevant for different individuals. And so we'll get into that. So first up, sleep restriction. Everyone thinks I'm crazy whenever I bring this up, because the whole idea is to sleep less before you sleep more. So what I have people do is keep a sleep log where they are keeping track of what time they go to bed, their best guess for how long it takes them to fall asleep, best guess for how many times they wake up during the night and how long they're awake during those times, what time they wake up in the morning and what time they get out of the bed. And we use that information to see how much sleep they're getting on average. So I use paper copies of sleep diaries, and then there's also a free app out there called CBTI Coach that does a really good job of tracking people's sleep too. So if you're interested in this, want to track your sleep, I highly recommend that CBTI Coach app. It's free, developed by a group at Stanford for the VA hospital. So what do we do with that? So now I've got somebody's sleep, so I know how much they're sleeping. What I'm going to do is put them on a sleep schedule that matches how much sleep their body's been producing. And this is where people think I'm crazy. So let's say somebody is sleeping 6 hours on average whenever they come in. And what I'll do is have them pick a wake time. So let's say they've got to be up at 6 a.m. for work, and I'll tell them that their new bedtime is midnight, and they can't go to sleep before their bedtime, and they've got to be out of bed by their wake time, and they can't take any naps during the day. How do you think people will feel 3 or 4 days into following a sleep schedule like that? What would happen to you if I put you on that sleep schedule? How would you feel? Yeah, exhausted? Any other adjectives? Yeah, maybe angry. Hopefully sleepy. That's what I'm really going for. So I'm trying to make my patients as sleepy as possible so that they can start falling asleep fast and staying asleep through the night. Because once again, I'm trying to get rid of those perpetuating factors so that I can get rid of that conditioned arousal. And so one of the best ways that we can do that is to make people extra sleepy and then help them relearn an association between sleep and the bed. So once we get them sleeping well during that time, we start adding time to their sleep schedule. So typically they'll start going to bed earlier, and usually we go in 15-minute increments per week. So if the first week they're at 12 to 6 and everything goes well, the following week they'd be 11:45 to 6, next week 11:30 to 6, and we keep repeating that process until the person feels good during the daytime, or they start running into sleep problems again. You know, so like if I said we kept doing that until the person was going to bed at 8 p.m., you know, they're going to start running into problems being able to fall asleep and stay asleep again, right? So, okay, so what we're trying to take advantage of is people's sleepiness or their need for sleep. We call that sleep debt in this treatment approach. So in this graph, we've got a normal sleep-wake cycle. So this person goes to bed at midnight, or I'm sorry, 11 p.m. They fall asleep, they sleep all the night, they wake up at 7 a.m., they burn off all the sleep debt, they wake up at 7 a.m., they start building up their need for sleep again. they go to bed at 11 p.m., and then that process continues to repeat itself. What do you think happens to somebody's sleep debt if they take a nap during the daytime? So if I take a nap at 2 p.m., what happens to my sleep debt? Yeah, not sleepy at night. And so what they're doing is they are burning off that sleep debt. So if I take a nap here, I'm going to burn off that sleep debt, and then when I wake up, I'll start accumulating it again, but I may not have enough sleep debt to be able to fall asleep quickly at night or stay asleep once I do fall asleep. So that's how napping and cutting into sleep debt can be a problem. What do you think happens to somebody's sleep debt if I put them on this restricted schedule where they've got to stay up later and get up earlier? Or what if I kept them up for an entire 24 hours? How much sleep debt do you think they would have? Anna is right, a lot. So if I keep you up for that full time, you're going to develop a ton of sleep debt. And so what ends up happening, so let's say you're my patient, I put you on a 6-hour sleep schedule, you still have insomnia. So those first 2 or 3 nights, you may not sleep all that well, but you're building up this need for sleep. And as your sleep debt increases, your chances, like I said earlier, your chances of falling asleep and staying asleep increase. When you stick to that schedule, you'll build up your sleep debt, and then it'll be able to roll over into the following night. So before long, I can get people sleeping well consistently on a shortened sleep schedule. And then that's when we start adding the time back in. So any questions about that? It's kind of a lot of information that I covered pretty quickly. But we also have quite a bit more to cover. So, well, we'll wait for questions at the end. So the next part of the treatment is called stimulus control, which is really just a fancy way of saying do nothing in bed but sleep, and sex, and sleep nowhere but the bed. But actually, it's even better to take your sex elsewhere, because we're trying to develop as strong of an association between sleep in the bed as possible and not anything else. So like in our pictures here, we've got a lady laying in bed who's watching television, she's eating dinner, and then we've got somebody else sleeping on their couch. And this is really common. People will develop these associations where they're not able to sleep in their bed, but they can sleep in another bed in their house, or they can sleep really well on the couch or the recliner. And that's because they're developing these associations with those places. So some rules about stimulus control. Number 1, go to bed only when you're sleepy. I'm always surprised by the number of patients I have, that aren't even sleepy when they go to bed, and they're surprised, that it takes them a long time to fall asleep. So he said, don't use your bed or bedroom for anything other than sleep or sex. If you're unable to fall asleep after about 15 or 20 minutes, we have patients get up, leave the bed and the bedroom if possible, and do something relaxing or boring until they start to feel sleepy again, and then they can return to bed at that point in time and try again. One of the caveats here is we actually don't want people looking at the clock. And you said, well, Kyle, you just told me to wait 15 or 20 minutes. How am I supposed to know how much time has passed if I don't look at a clock? Well, why do you all think we would say don't look at a clock? Any ideas? Yeah, time seems to go even slower. You keep looking at it, and it increases your anxiety about stress. So, what we say is, use your best guess for how much time has gone on. If you feel like wide awake and a significant amount of time has passed, then it's better just to get up and wait until you feel sleepy again. And all of you are right that it's better we want to try to eliminate as much stress as possible, and the clock can become a source of stress for people. The worst case scenario is, when people are literally counting down the hours and the minutes of how much opportunity they have to sleep before they wake up. They put somebody said this earlier, it makes you put a ton of pressure on yourself to fall asleep, and the harder you try to sleep, unfortunately, the more difficult it becomes. So one of the other rules, wake up at a regular time regardless of how well or how long you slept. So we talked about that a little bit. Avoid taking naps. So that's stimulus control in a nutshell. I'll just mention the kinds of things people do whenever they get up. A lot of times people are watching TV. Now, I know that's a no-no in a lot of circles, but really the light from the TV is probably not a significant enough factor to be significantly disrupting their sleep. But I would say that the type of programs that they're watching or what they would be doing on electronic devices is probably the main culprit. So if you were to grab your tablet or your phone and get on Facebook, and you're starting to see the political posts that your cousin is making, well, then you get, pretty, that could be a stressful kind of thing, or you're getting emotionally worked up. And so I think that's why electronic devices, especially social media, can tend to cause us problems, in addition to any problems experienced by the light itself. Okay, so some general tips for healthy sleep hygiene. So we said go to bed and wake up at the same time. We already talked about that. Watch out for caffeine consumption. Half-life for caffeine is approximately 7 or 8 hours. People will vary in their sensitivity to it, but we try to say don't try to drink too much coffee around noon for most people. Darla, I do have problems with sleep sometimes, but I know the things to do to keep it from getting worse, or from, like I said earlier, taking on the life of its own. It's really normal for people to experience disrupted sleep, but it's what they do to try to compensate for it that gets them into trouble. So sleep hygiene again, some things you can do, get bright light exposure early in the morning. Make sure your bedroom is conducive to sleep. So you want it to be as dark as possible, as quiet as possible. And really what we mean by quiet is so that you're not getting disrupted by noises throughout your house. And so a lot of people will use white noise machines, fans, music, ambient music, those kinds of things, so they can drown out other sounds around. And then also cool. I think the optimal temperature for sleep is around 67 degrees. Sleep on as a comfortable mattress and pillow as you can find. Don't go to bed hungry or too full. That probably goes without saying. It can be helpful to develop a relaxing routine. And so doing the same kinds of things before bed every night help train your brain to know that it's getting ready for sleep. Karen, I'll answer your question here in a minute. Said reserve your bedroom for sleeping only. And then regular physical activity certainly helps people sleep, and it sounds like people in this group have definitely found that for themselves. And then pets in the bedroom can cause problems for people. My dog would be very sad if I kicked her out of the bedroom. So maybe that's why I have problems with sleep sometimes, but I'm not willing to change that right now. All right, and one of our final slides here, challenging beliefs about sleep and the consequences of poor sleep. And so people will get these different beliefs or ideas stuck in their head, and it tends to make their sleep problems worse over time. So the belief that everyone needs 8 hours of sleep, most people need 8 hours of sleep, but not everyone. And so if you're having problems with sleep, you may be the somebody that needs probably a little bit less sleep than 8 hours. If I don't sleep, catastrophic things will happen. So we had an example of that earlier, like you'll do terrible on your presentation and your boss will fire you. If you don't fall asleep by a certain time, you're never going to fall asleep. People start to feel really helpless and hopeless. And then what that usually results in is people trying harder to fall asleep. And the harder people try, the more difficult it becomes. That's why insomnia is pretty tricky. Okay, so that's a quick overview. And then, so a little summary there. What I do in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, or anybody that's probably practicing CBTI, is they will monitor your sleep ability, put you on a sleep schedule that matches that to help you increase the quality of your sleep. And then once you improve the quality, we start extending the quantity. They'll have you practice stimulus control. We'll certainly want you to have good sleep hygiene. And then they may also be talking to you about your beliefs about sleep and assess what kind of role that's playing in your insomnia. And then use cognitive restructuring to help you come, or mindfulness based strategies to help you come up with more realistic beliefs, or help you change your association to your thoughts about sleep altogether, like in a mindfulness-based approach. All right, so I flew through that. We've got a little bit of time left, so I'd love to answer y'all's questions. And since Karen already asked one, I will start with that. So why are sleep aids long-term bad? Well, we know from scientific research that long-term use of hypnotic medications increases risk, or people's risk of developing dementia, as well as all-cause mortality. So it increases your chance of dying sooner. I know that's not very specific, but that is one of the reasons that prescribers don't like prescribing those medications for long-term use. And the other side of that is, that the behavioral treatment is really effective for treating insomnia too. So, a lot of people prefer the most natural approach possible. Kimberly, yeah, so I've heard part of the brain still stays awake on sleep aids. Is this true? Actually, Kim, I think it's a little bit of the opposite, in that the sleep aids will be putting the sleep aids will turn off parts of your brain during sleep that you actually want to be functioning during sleep, because of the restorative function, or all the different things going on in your brain while you're sleeping. Does that make sense? So it shuts down everything when actually you need that activity to get the most restorative sleep you can. All right, any other questions? Yeah, Karen, I think they'll share these slides with the group afterwards.
Okay, so do we have any more questions? I think I just asked one actually, but
that's a good one.
Yeah.
So what I would say, you got two different approaches. So if you work late in the evening a few times a week, should you adjust your sleep schedule for the whole week? What do you all think? I can see this going two different ways. Darla says no. Catherine says depends on the person. Karen says no if a few times. So what I would say is that if you already have a pretty regular schedule, then I probably wouldn't change it. But what I mean by that is, so let's say you typically go to bed around 11 and are up around 7, but a couple nights of the week you work until 2 a.m., and you tend to sleep in later those days. What I would say is, I would try to keep your wake time as close as possible to your normal wake time. So on those nights that you're working late, it's probably going to be more helpful for you to, get up around 8 or 9 on those days, and not sleep as long as you possibly could, because that could cause problems on the subsequent night. And then on the flip side of that, you could also adjust your schedule to just be more of the nighttime schedule, where you're staying up until 2 every night and getting up around 10. But that could also mess with your other obligations throughout the day. So in general, people are a little bit better off trying to stick with a little bit less sleep on those nights, and then they'll be able to maintain a more regular pattern overall.
Thank you.
Scott, how do you adjust for the sleep schedule of a baby? Oh, I've got a 1-year-old, and boy has she adjusted my sleep schedule over the last year. So Scott, are you talking more about like frequent awakenings, or are you talking more about their tendency to get up or wake up earlier? Frequent awakenings. You know, Scott, I think that just comes with the territory of having a baby. Parents kind of go into survival mode. And what I would say is, if you don't have problems with insomnia, aka you can fall asleep pretty quickly and stay asleep, if you do fall asleep, then make up for the sleep when you can. But if you're having problems with insomnia, once again, shortening your sleep schedule a little bit is probably going to help you out more overall and keep you from engaging in those perpetuating factors. Okay, Kimberly is asking, would the strategies I endorse be helpful for someone who stays in the early sleep stages too much, so really light sleep? Kim, yeah, certainly. One of the things this treatment approach is best at is increasing the quality of people's sleep or getting into deep sleep faster. So, what I would say, if you kind of know the time that you would typically fall into a deeper state of sleep, try staying up close to around that time, and you may be pleasantly surprised that you don't spend as much time in these really early stages of sleep, or what some people call like twilighting. All right, any more questions? I know we're getting close to 6. I'm happy to stick around for a few more minutes as long as people have questions. Jody says, opinions on things like chamomile tea or lavender oil. Jody, as a scientist, I always try to look at the scientific evidence for these things. I don't think there's any negative associations with using them, but there's also not a lot of data to support that they're helpful. That being said, there's a lot of people will say anecdotally that those things help them, and so I say more power to you, if you find it helpful.
So are there any more questions from anyone for Dr. Davis at this time? Doesn't seem like it. Okay, well, that was a great presentation. I really enjoyed that. It looks like all of our attendees enjoyed it too. So thank you so much for being here tonight, Dr. Davis. And thank you to everyone who came and joined us. That was fun. So thanks for the interaction. That was fun. So when you exit out of this webinar, please be sure to fill out the evaluation form that will pop up. Or when you get home tonight, check your email. You'll have an email with this evaluation form. It only takes a few minutes, and it's great information for us with how we structure our webinars. Next month, we have a webinar with Patricia Smith on Tuesday, June 19th at 3 p.m. for a presentation on compassion fatigue. You can find more information on that presentation through our newsletter, which you can access through our website, www.empoweridaho.org. Also our Facebook page, if you type Empower Idaho into the Facebook search bar, you can find information on our events. You can also sign up for our newsletter, which I will put the link in the comment box right now for you guys. And then that just updates people on all of our events coming up and just news with Empower Idaho. So yeah, that is all that we have for you today. Thank you again to everyone. Thanks again to Dr. Davis. And this recording will be up on our website if you ever want to access it or share it with friends. So yeah, thank you,
All right,
guys.
thanks everyone. Have a good night. I hope you sleep better.
Bye.
Bye.